Oh, they drew the district boundaries in a manner so obscene. People gathered signatures to make Missouri clean. We cast 1 million votes with fair elections as a dream. People power makes us strong. When people power pulls together to create a better world forever, gerrymandered boundaries will sever. People power makes us strong. Jeff City politicians said, oh no, this shall not be. They created a chicanery they call Amendment 3 to negate election ballots of a strong majority. People power makes us strong. When people power pulls together to create a better world forever, gerrymandered boundaries will sever. People power makes us strong. With power we are fighting to protect democracy from redistricting shenanigans, unfair skullduggery. Fair and free elections will depend on you and me. People power makes us strong. Power pulls together to create a better world forever. Gerrymandered boundaries will sever. People power makes us strong. Oh, when people power pulls together to create a better world forever, gerrymandered boundaries will sever. People power makes us strong.
Woohoo!
All righty. Mary? Oh, Mary Ann, you're muted.
Okay, am I okay now? All right, okay. Welcome to League of Women Voter Kansas City's Clay, Jackson, and Platte Counties presentation of the Fight for Fair Maps this evening. This event is part of a national redistricting program of the League of Women Voters People-Powered Fair Maps, focused on creating fair political maps for our whole nation. It was launched to create fair, transparent redistricting protections to eliminate political and racial gerrymandering. So for this evening's presentation, if you have questions, please put them in chat. And if you are asking questions over Facebook, they will be monitored and transferred to chat. And then they will be presented during the question and answer portion of the presentation. Your questions will be answered according to their order in the chat room. And if you have any questions about last week's presentation by Shanna Jones, you may ask them tonight of our presenter. And we would ask, in all fairness to everyone, to please mute your mic. Thank you.
And now I'm delighted to introduce Sean Sonker Nicholson. Sean leads the Fair Maps Missouri Coalition. He is also the Senior Content Strategist and Research Director at GPS Impact. He previously served as Executive Director of Progress Missouri. helping to found that communications and research organization in 2011. Before that, Sean was the executive director of Fired Up Missouri and a vice president at Kennedy Communications, a research and communications shop in Washington, D.C. Sean's a proud Mizzou Tiger and Georgetown Hoya. He lives in Kansas City, Missouri with his wife and 2 sons. Okay, I learned all that on the internet. Sean was quite modest in telling me about his background. But I first heard of Sean in 2018 during the campaign for Amendment 1, which we all know as Clean Missouri. I don't know, but it appeared to me that Sean was Mr. Clean Missouri, that he was essential for its decisive passage that November. Only brazenly deceptive ballot language during the weirdest presidential election ever allowed Amendment 3 to squeak out a puny win last November. But that's why we're together tonight. Sean is going to help us think through the situation to fight for the cleanest, most nonpartisan redistricting result possible under the circumstances. So Sean, please take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that kind introduction. You're totally right that Amendment 3 and the results last year are certainly a disappointment, but if anything can ground our work in the weeks and months ahead, we should all get up and go to work with the knowledge that Amendment 3 is designed to allow a lot of really bad things to happen, but it does not require them. And so it's on all of us on the outside of the system trying to change the outcome, to be working to educate the stakeholders, whether that be community leaders, members of the commission or General Assembly that are going to be drawing the congressional and state legislators maps. And then eventually we think the judicial panels that come after the commissions, there's multiple layers of stakeholders. And so there's a lot of work that, to ensure that we have the best outcome possible. And the league leaders in Kansas City and around the state are going to be a huge part of that success. I am going to talk tonight. I know you all have been talking a lot about redistricting and fair maps in a lot of different contexts and a lot of different combinations of league leaders. I'm going to focus tonight on shenanigans. So Shanna in the song that started us off talked about shenanigans in Jefferson City. I'm going to talk through what I think everyone should be on the lookout for in terms of bad things that are happening, and then very specific things that all of us can be fighting for and agitating and encouraging commissioners to be doing as they evaluate any plan that comes forward, regardless of political party. It's going to be on all of us to make sure that both, like, these are partisan roles that are going to get appointed. It's on all of us who are not in those roles to be making sure that the Democratic and Republican commissioners that get appointed know that folks are watching and that folks expect fair maps. This has been a long fight, not just in the last 2 years, but decades coming. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what folks should be on the lookout for, and what the other side, not the other side, but like what folks who are trying to gerrymander may be trying to orchestrate right now as they prepare for this process to come. So if you're trying to gerrymander, if you're trying to rig the rules, really it comes down to 2 key strategies. They are going to try to, the folks who are trying to rig the system are going to try and pack all the voters that they would rather disempower into as many or into as few districts as possible, so that the outcomes in those overpacked districts are as lopsided as possible. So they go about that a lot of ways. There's a lot of sophisticated software that can help people who are trying to get unfair and undemocratic, like small d, undemocratic outcomes. They're going to try to overpack voters that they're trying to disempower. And then where they can't overpack, then they will spread out and crack political power of the folks that they're trying to disempower so that they don't have a functional voice, they don't have a way to impact the outcome of election elsewhere. So this is the formula, regardless of political party, regardless of the state. When Democrats are in power and when Democrats abuse the process, they are packing and cracking the voters that they are trying to disempower. When Republicans are in power, and trying to abuse the process. They are packing and cracking the voters they are trying to disenfranchise. So this is an American problem and a politics problem. This is not a partisan problem. The third thing that folks who are trying to rig the system will do is they will give a lot of big talk and say a lot of words about how they care about communities, but that all is a smokescreen for the real activity of them using computers and software to carve up communities. So they are not trying to protect communities in sort of meaningful way. They are trying to protect some communities as they go and slice up neighborhoods and apartments and blocks to achieve particular, very specific outcome-oriented ends. When folks start talking a whole bunch about communities, like it's on the rest of us to make sure that that's not just talk, that there's actually something behind that, and they need to be really clear about what sort of communities and the process that they're going by to try and protect those communities. The fourth thing that gerrymandering enthusiasts will try to do is they are going to talk about pretty shapes as if that's a meaningful outcome, as their computers do lots of dirty work. So this is it is certainly the case that there are some districts around the country that have truly absurd geographic shapes. And when you look at and you plot them, like we've all seen these districts, they do look ridiculous. There are, but that you can take that argument too far and it can lose track of the real goal, which is not beautiful squares and beautiful hexagons and beautiful circles. The real goal is a democracy that works for everyone and like has meaningful and fair representation. I'm going to show an example of what this is and how shapes don't really communicate, or the shapes are not the best measure or even like the real measure of what a fair map should be. So if we imagine a hypothetical district or a state or a county and you're trying to draw new lines, so you'd say right here we've got 50 precincts and you need to go draw 5 districts. You can draw beautiful square districts with right angles that look beautiful and wonderful, but what you would get here is a totally disproportionate and unfair outcome where the orange voters, the orange precincts, would have zero political power because they get lumped together in pretty square shapes. And so I just share all of this at the front end as this can be a trap, and it is not a meaningful, like, of course we want compact districts that empower local communities and empower local voters, but it can be a smokescreen when done without good intent, and it can be a spokesperson for a whole lot of other stuff. And we really think, based on how the backers of Amendment 3 conducted themselves, that they are intending to use compactness and geographic shapes as a smokescreen for overpacking voters that they're trying to disempower around the state. The last thing that gerrymanders will try to do is they will try to build a coalition of partisan and local parochial interests to get plans passed that protect incumbent politicians in overly safe and too safe districts, in districts that disempower voters and pre-bake the outcomes. So they go get specific politicians or local political factions to sign on to a statewide plan that disempowers everyone and doesn't really put voters first. This is, again, an American problem. It's a thing that happens around the country. It's a tried and true formula for folks who are trying to rig the game. You go get a few self-interested politicians to say, yes, I want to pre-bake everything, and then voters get left out in the cold. So that is the playbook. That is what we should be expecting from folks who are trying to rig the game and who are trying to not have fair maps. But there are very specific things that we can do as outsiders, as activists, as nonpartisan advocates to make sure that we are identifying, describing, and pushing back on gerrymandering efforts in real time. There is going to be a time, there are going to be key moments over the next 6, 9, 12 months where it will be extraordinarily important for advocates from around the state and the leagues of women voters are going to be such key parts of that strategy for lifting up and making very clear, hey, this is a joke, this is not a serious effort, this is not a good faith effort to draw a fair plan. And that will be important in the moment. It is not going to be very helpful to talk about it after the maps get drawn and say, look, it's all a bunch of junk. Because again, in the process for state house and state senate districts, there's the commission, there's the commissioners, and then everything that happens in that commission process then gets forwarded to the judicial panels. So a big, robust body of information that is based in data and based in expertise is going to be very useful for making sure that the judges down the line, if it gets to the judges, have good information on which to draw the lines or finalize plans. So how we go about identifying gerrymanders. The first and the most important thing is to remember the full picture and the full plan. It can be very tempting at times to get overly focused on a particular district. And the way that the Missouri process is built is for everything to happen in a black box. So you don't know what's going on and like, why was this one block included and why was that one block not? Or why was it drawn to go around this house, but not that house? Sometimes we can make very good inferences around that. Like there are a couple examples in Missouri where particular politicians are drawn in or out of the district. But what really matters at the end of the day is the overall plan. That overall plan matters along with what might happen to local communities, and we can't lose sight of the big picture piece. Folks who are trying to gerrymander will say you couldn't possibly figure out what a gerrymander is. It's all subjective, it's all in the eye of the beholder, but that is total garbage. There are very specific, very real ways that political scientists, that geographers, that nonpartisan experts can look at partisan plans that come from either political party, and they can quantify the bias. And we can all look when plans get submitted and see, okay, this is in the normal range of what's okay, and this is way outside the bounds of what is normal. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of how you do that. It can happen very quickly. The computing power to do this is so much more advanced than it has been in the past. There are 3 big tests that get used on a site like Planscoreorg. I'd encourage everyone to go check that out. It's Planscore.org. They have built a national database of redistricting plans from across the country, across multiple decades, so that we have a full data set from around the country that can look and see, okay, what is the overall distribution of plans from overly Democratic in a way that Democrats are trying to rig the game to overly Republican in a way that Republicans are trying to rig the game. And then you could see like when there's a whole lot of fair plans around the country. Missouri has had very fair plans in the past, and we can talk through some of that in the Q&A time if folks want. But like here is a distribution. Here's a bell curve of congressional maps from around the country over the last few decades. And you can see the majority of plans are somewhere in the middle. So that gray line in the middle of the graph that you see there, that is exactly fair with this particular metric. And I'm going to show you the 3 different metrics that I mentioned before. So efficiency gap, partisan bias, and mean median. I will say at the outset that mathematicians and experts have their favorites of these, and they will argue that one is better, one is than others. There are some that work better at measuring bias in different kinds of geographic contexts. Missouri, obviously, like we've got big metro areas at the corners, at the edges of the state. And so we've got a ton of dense population there, and those tend to be dense Democratic voters. The most Democratic census blocks in the state are more Democratic than the most Republican census blocks, just in terms of a raw percentage. So, Missouri is unique, and there is concentration and density that has to be taken into account. But that doesn't mean that we can't quantify bias and look and see, did someone put their finger on the scale, or is the outcome unfair in an objective way? So we're looking right now at I'm going to walk through 3 different metrics for the congressional plans that we have in Missouri right now. So you'll see, if we look at the efficiency gap and that metric, our congressional map that we've been living under in the last decade is more skewed from a partisan bias point of view than 2 out of 3 plans from around the country using this particular metric. So outside the norm of how congressional plans get done. If we use a different metric, if you look at the partisan bias test, which again, some mathematicians will say like, hey, I prefer this one, or this one is overly simplistic, or this one's overly complex. If we look at them all together, like we can get a real picture of what's going on, and we can see that something is out of whack. So with partisan bias, the Missouri congressional plan is way out there on the edge of like, clearly someone's got their finger on the scale and trying to skew the results in a way that disempower voters. So if you use the partisan bias test, the Missouri congressional plan is more skewed than almost everything. Same thing on the mean median test. Our congressional plan we're out there on the outer limits of a normal distribution. And these are all screenshots and data taken from the Planscore website. So independent experts will be doing these analyses. This will happen much more quickly than it has in the past. There's just much more data infrastructure, and the computing power is so much better than it was 10 or 20 years ago for evaluating plans in real time. So if anyone tries to tell you that gerrymandering is a subjective thing and you couldn't possibly do it, like it's all in the eye of the beholder, that person is trying to trick you, or they don't have their facts right, or they are very, very aware of how they are trying to snow you and get a bad plan passed. So we talked about focus on the big picture, quantify the bias. Second way that we can look and see if some hinky business has been going on is, did map makers worry about where the politicians live? If they are taking a look and they're trying to say, oh, that's the so-and-so district, or oh, this district's drawn for so-and-so, that by definition is them trying to determine the outcome in a way that protects incumbents and it protects their political interests at the expense of voters. So best practice for fair maps is not to worry at all about where politicians are. You should be worrying about the voters and the communities and how do their political interests get represented in the government, not how can people who happen to be in government right now protect their power at the expense of everyone else. Third big test, or third big line of inquiry on any sort of plans. Are there going to be meaningful elections in new districts under this new plan? And by that, we mean, is it going to be like the last 10 or 20 years in Missouri, where more than 90% of our state legislative races are not in any way competitive? Like, so voters don't have a real choice, that the whole thing is pre-baked. About half of Missouri legislative elections for House and Senate have had only one major party candidate on the ballot in November. And that's because everyone knows who's going to win based on who comes out of the primary. There's no way that you could draw every district to be competitive. You wouldn't want that anyway, because like one little itty bitty adjust in the statewide mood would mean, hundreds of seats get flipped to one or the other. But there should be meaningful and real swing districts and places where, as the electorate changes, as things happen in Jefferson City or don't happen in Jefferson City, that the people can come together and say, we need a new direction. This goober needs to be fired. Like, if there's no meaningful competition and no seats ever change hands, like that means that the thing got pre-baked and it's all about protecting the incumbents. 4, what do independent experts who have no skin in the game from a Missouri political power point of view say about this plan? There's a much more robust and engaged community online, in academia, in nonprofit organizations around the country than there has been in the past. That has largely grown out of the reform movement, of which the League has been a big part. They are going to be able to do their analysis, and they're going to be able to show with confidence, with the knowledge of how gerrymanders happen around the country, both partisan and racial gerrymanders. Like, they are going to be able to evaluate and look in real time and say, this thing is a joke. Like, and they're going to be able to provide that analysis both to the commissions and to the public, and then it's on the rest of us to help amplify that. And there are a lot of great independent experts, that they're on the level and that they're trying to do the right thing, because they're arguing with each other in real time about, hey, I think you're overstated this thing, or they're all trying to get to the same goal, and they're working with each other, and in that tension of the academic universe of trying to get to the best place and account for all the complicated factors that have to be taken into account with redistricting. And the last thing, and the big thing that may pop up this year is, does everyone count in the plan? So you maybe remember in the Amendment 3 fight that one of the explicit goals of the Amendment 3 sponsor, this was repeated by the Attorney General's office in the court fight last year, is that their goal is to draw maps in Missouri for House and Senate that don't count kids and don't count immigrants. So they want to make Missouri the first state in America to draw maps based just on the adult citizen population. This is super bad and super wrong and super discriminatory on purpose. And so what we need to be on the lookout for is any sort of activity in the commissions, before the commissions, to create some sort of alternate data set besides the census that they might use to try to draw maps based on the decennial census. And we can get into that and talk through some of those details if useful. But the simple yes or no question is, does everyone count in the map? That is what every state does. for every kind of redistricting now is what Missouri has been doing since the late 1800s. Like, it is the right thing to do, and that is a tradition that should be continued. And anyone who's trying to tell you otherwise is trying to do something that is explicitly discriminatory and is all about taking away political power of communities of color. So those are the big things that I wanted to leave y'all with to start a conversation. There's going to be all sorts of funny business, as we know. We have been talking about it as advocates, as reformers for a while, and we're now about to see people trying to rig the game in real time. And it's on us to be aware of that, to be vigilant, and then to respond quickly in a timely manner in the right channels so that we can make sure that that the safeguards that are in the system can have the information they need to do the right thing.
So, Sean, this is Rita Golden, and I wanted to ask two questions. The first one being, when does the analysis of the testing come out? And the second piece of that is, will that analysis, when it comes out, leave enough time for advocacy?
Yes. So there is probably, so there's a lot of like pre-work and planning that's happening over the next few months. So there's going to be a few big milestones that happen between now and the first part of 2022. Nominations for the commissions will start to be sent into the governor in May. The governor will make the selections for the commissions, sometime in late May or June. Once those nominations are finalized, then the commission begins 15 days after that, and that commission will exist for 6 months. The commission, and even if everything takes its longest amount of time possible, like that commission is going to start to exist before the final data comes from the Census Bureau because of pandemic delays. So the fine-grained census block level data is going to come out sometime in September, we think. So September 30th, the Census Bureau has said sometime before September 30th. But once we have that, when that information is in there, everybody's computer systems get updated. And then there's going to be a chunk of time, maybe 4 months of those commissions working where meetings will happen. Those commissions may or may not be at all interested in what the public has to say. And so there may be logistical hurdles to getting folks there and providing the evidence and the information that are required. But we'll be working to make sure that those are as accessible as possible, and transportation and other things are there. But it will be on all of us to make sure that there are conversations to the extent that are possible with commissioners of both parties to say, like, hey, like, if something happens in back rooms in a quick hurry, that is that is an obvious sign that someone is trying to rig the game and do something hinky in the process. So there's going to be a chunk of time, details TBD, but it's not going to be a situation where the information comes out in December 15th and the plans, and then everything has to get sorted out by December 30th.
Okay. Also, when you say it's up to us to prevent a bad plan, that leaves me with the idea that the citizenry can actually change the outcome of the commission. Is that true?
So the system is designed to make the decisions either made by political appointees or by judges. And so the best ways to impact the outcome, if the best ways to positively impact the outcome will be to engage in the official processes to the extent that relationships are had with the commissioners and that relationships can get built. I think those folks are there doing public service and doing their duty and making sure that they understand the stakes of what's happening and what it would mean, and how folks might hold them accountable if they go vote for some sort of map that disenfranchises voters. I think that could be important down the line. But I think what will be important for everyone to think through is that there's a whole lot of activity that's just noise and advocates talking to advocates. And then there will be a lot of there will be key moments where official information can be, or information can be put into the official processes, and that's what will be important. And so I think separating the signal from the noise will be important for all of us, and we should be in contact and sharing notes as we go to be as effective as possible.
So is it better for groups to actually have more people addressing the commission individually, or have one person represent a larger group?
I think quality will always matter over quantity. I think there will probably be ways for information to be provided, if not remotely, then if you've been to a legislative hearing in Jefferson City, sometimes you can just like submit written testimony. You don't need to waste everyone's time. So I think we'll have to figure out how those commissions operate. One of the interesting things about how this is all set up is there are some very clear rules set in the Constitution, but there's a whole lot of details that have to get sorted out by the commissioners themselves, because this is a once a decade thing, and sometimes there's institutional memory and sometimes there's not. And what has been past practice is not necessarily a rule. So I think we'll know more as things get going on the right and the best ways to engage. But I do think a volume play is not necessarily helpful, but quality will really matter.
Okay. And do you think that there will be a way to push for more data out of the commission as the commission does its work?
Certainly the world can ask. They don't have to care. I think everything I would say is done through the lens of, if someone is trying to be secretive or someone is trying to hide the ball, that making that clear in the transcripts and the testimony that's provided is the most important thing. So like just getting data for data's sake out of the commission, that might be academically interesting, but it won't impact the outcome. One of the things we do know is that at the conclusion of the commission process, the transcripts and all the materials gets packaged up and they're sent over to the judicial panel. So I think there may come a time where if there's funny business that folks attempt on the commissions, of making sure that that is clearly articulated and documented in a way that can let folks draw some conclusions about what's going on.
Okay, so it's going from when that information goes from the commission to the judicial, to the judges. That is really seems like it's the most important time to be able to set an opinion in front of the judges.
So I think it's like throughout the whole process. So these commissions will exist for up to 6 months. And then if there's a judicial panel, that will come after that. I think all of the testimony and all the evidence that's provided through the process, like I don't have any reason to think that what is submitted in the final days is going to be any more influential or significant than what happens in the first month. So I don't know that there's I don't know that folks need to think about it in a backloaded way. I think as meetings are scheduled and as there's an opportunity, like that is the time to take the opportunities that are provided.
Are those when the commission meets, whether they meet in person or whether they meet virtually, are those meetings open to the public?
I think good chunks of them are. Certainly, like they are required to have some public meetings. I assume they'll have some sort of, they may have executive session or stuff behind there. I don't know all the rules on that, but there will for sure be ways for the public to be engaged. If you're a glutton for punishment, you can go read the transcripts from public meetings back in 2011, 2012, and then 2001. Okay.
And then given that both everybody, no matter what party you belong to, have input, how does something get skewed? So if there are both an equal amount of Democrats and Republicans on a commission, that in theory would mean that everything stays equal, but clearly it doesn't. So how does that get skewed?
So I think it's different answers for each of our three maps. So if we take them all separate. So a congressional plan, the congressional maps are not, like that is a purely political process. So in 2011, there was a map that was passed by the General Assembly. Governor Nixon vetoed it. And then there was a bipartisan veto override vote to make it pass. As I mentioned at the top, like the way that bad maps get passed is you get some folks who are fighting for self-protection, for themselves, and then you get a statewide finger on the scale that skews the overall outcome. And that's the coalition that comes together, across the country to get bad maps into law. With our Senate map, that had a multi-step drama process in 2011 and 2012. The commissions happened, the commissions failed, the judges drew a plan. The plan that the judges drew was unconstitutional on its face. And so the Supreme Court threw out the judicial pass plan. A second commission came together. They passed a plan unanimously when they were running out of time. And what they passed was essentially an incumbent protection map. And so the deal on the table was, everyone goes and wins their things. So those of us in the Kansas City area, the 5th, the 9th districts, the Democrat is going to win whoever comes out of the primary. The 17th district and the Northland, that's the only thing, that's one of the few districts in the entire state, frankly, that has been even a little bit competitive and that has changed hands in the last decade. The Eastern Jack district, designed to be Republican, so whoever wins that primary wins. Same thing with districts north of the river in Platte and Buchanan. So everything was pre-baked, and that's, there was bipartisan agreement of hey, we're out of time, and so let's just draw maps that protect the incumbent political powers. On the House maps, I think that is a great example of the process can be a black box, and what matters in the end is less intent. You can't document or measure intent, but we can sure see the outcome. And so I think what matters is the actual outcome in ways that you can quantify. And I think that is the message and the drum that we need to be banging, is that what matters is what happens to voters, as much as the intent.
Sorry about that. And then also you gave examples of how to show that a map was gerrymandered. Are these the things that we're going to look at? Are we going to be able to actually see the results as we go through this process of advocating for things that we feel are not correct?
Yeah, my assumption is that there will be two general kinds of data and analyses that are done during the process. So one kind of analyses will be not about any particular plan, but what they'll do is they'll use computers to do thousands and thousands of randomly created maps, and then show a distribution of, if you just threw spaghetti on the wall to see how a map is played, what are the natural contours of how maps, how different metrics might go, so that you can see if the natural distribution looks something like this, and some sort of political party puts in a map that's way over here, that is evidence that someone is doing something hinky. And so that will be, analysis that everyone can see and will be part of the public record, just for some level setting. And then there will be all sorts of analyses that can be done. There's tons of tools now that just didn't exist 10 years ago, where you can upload a plan and you can get a whole lot of data back. Everything from, is the population equalized, to, what are the different demographic details about these particular things, what's the owner to renter demographic or breakdown in different districts, to other measures of bias. So that process, you have to get the file, then it gets uploaded, and the details of just, does it happen in a matter of minutes, or does it happen overnight, or in a couple hours? That is TBD, but it's not going to be plans get introduced and then no one has any idea until they're approved. So, yeah.
Okay. And all of that information, including the software that we could use to do that analysis on our own, is going to be on Planscoreorg.
So I don't know if Planscore.org is going to do real-time analysis. The primary purpose of that, okay, I can find out. The historic, that is designed to be a repository of all the approved plans, and then they go do some fine-grained analysis so you can see the historical record. There are a number of different tools that have been crafted by experts from around the country. There's one called Dave's Redistricting app. There's one called Districtor that we're using for a community mapping project that some of you all have already worked on. There's some called Princeton. I forget, Princeton built a tool, and I'm blanking on the name of that one. So there are a number of these. I also think that we can all expect that there are all these publicly available tools. Both political parties are going to have their own data sets and their own sets of tools, right? The stakes are very high on all this. And if someone comes in, we're going to have to separate, you know, as discerning consumers, what if this is just noise from a political party thing, and what is it they can actually document and show, like, yeah, like this is really out of whack. So we should expect political parties to fight each other and say, like, your plan is garbage or not. And like they will make their own strategic decisions on how public they make that kind of stuff. But I think my expectation is that there will be a combination of independent, nonpartisan folks having analyses on these plans along with partisan sources as well.
Okay. Do you, aside from Sharice Davids, do you see any other politician who might be drawn out of their district so that they lose? I know she's the only one I know of who's been mentioned so far through this process.
So I think it is too early to know on the Missouri side. So in both Kansas and Missouri with the congressional maps, those are purely political processes with everything that's terrible about that as a process. So they can do whatever they want. What Chief Justice John Roberts said in the Supreme Court case a couple of years ago was the federal courts are not going to be involved. And so, you know, there may be state law that creates some guardrails, but, you know, from a federal courts kind of perspective, there aren't any limits there. I think the trade-offs can be regional as much as they are partisan at times. So I think, you know, one of the things that we may see is jockeying among different geographic factions in the majority party in either state of, you know, they have to make, any particular ambitious politician has got to decide, do we have a statewide point of view, or do I have a self-serving, self-interest point of view because I want a congressional district that I can go win? And so we'll just have to see how folks balance their ego with their, you know, their partisan hats. And so, but I don't know necessarily that anyone else is on the chopping block. And I also think that it's also worth, one of the other layers that can be looked at is how durable some of these gerrymanders are. That is like another layer of analysis, and not to make things too complicated, but cities are growing and communities are growing all the time. Like, we're all moving and growing and all the things. So as Kansas City continues to grow south and west, it continues to grow east, and it continues to grow north and east, and it's going to go down to Raymore and all that kind of stuff. So people are moving all the time. You know, and there's even been a change in the east side, the eastern part of the metro area in Kansas City in the last decade, as there's been a realignment. So none of these things are permanent, but that doesn't mean that they don't have profound short-term implications.
Okay. Okay. And will your group be putting out talking points or any other information to help the general public understand the process a little bit better and what looks a little funky, so to say?
Yeah, I can promise that you won't wonder what I'm thinking or what other folks are thinking. So I think the exact calendar and details of that are TBD, but you know, it is in all of our interests to get the public as engaged as possible. And I think one of the things that gives me hope is that we, especially in Missouri, we have folks who are average or smarter than the average bear in terms of how redistricting works and how it gets played with, just based on the work that's been happening the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay, great. Thank you. One last shout out for any other questions that anybody has. If you want to throw them in the chat, that would be great. And we can ask Sean quick before he signs off for us, and we thank him and we end our meeting. Okay, so okay. So I think that's probably it for our questions. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. And everybody, please join me in applause. You can unmute and do actual applause. You can do raise emojis. So thank Sean Nicholson for joining us and helping all of us prepare to take action. Thank you so much, Sean, because folks, this is a once in a decade effort. This is a big deal. And to be effective, we need to prepare ahead. So we are ready when the time is right and when we are called to action. And that's what this is all about. Sean is warning us. You are seeing, Sean, what's coming down and preparing us to be ready to go. So that's what we're here to do. And so I want to close us out by challenging all of you and push you a little bit. And I want to ask you, how can we think bigger? How can we do more? How can we build off of the work that we did in 2020, right? Or in prior elections? We've learned so much already by taking this action. How can we make sure that education, what we've learned here, is used as effectively as possible? So how are you bringing other people into this conversation with you? And how are you preparing the people around you to take action alongside you when that time is right? So share in chat. I want you to share in chat how you plan to take action. What are some talents that you can bring to the table to help make this happen? Do you feel comfortable on social media? Or do you feel confident writing a letter to the editor? Are you going to show up to a rally when the time comes to come show our strength as people calling for action? So feel free to share in chat some ideas and encourage others. Let's do everything that we can do. So recapping some of the things that Sean said that I think are some important sort of calls to action for us to be aware of. We want to make sure that the commission has a lot of robust data. We want to understand and educate ourselves on plans, check plans by leaning on data experts and independent experts to tell us what's going on when these plans start coming out. We need to be visiting Planscoreorg to assess districts and see how our current maps stack up. And when the commission starts releasing information this fall and winter, we've got to be ready to go, right? We've got to get updated on the data that's coming out. We've got to be ready to attend public hearings or rallies. We need to speak out with letters to the editor. We're going to need to do some social media sharing. We're going to call our friends, and maybe we're going to need to be advocates. Maybe we'll need to rally our organizations that we're part of, our community leaders, our business leaders, to send formal letters. Remember how Sean said, quality is so important. So who do we know? Who do you know in your circle who is a leader, an influential voice, who could write a letter, who could help speak out? How can we use our power, our people power in this room? So I want to thank everybody so much for being here. I want to thank you for being here, for exercising your power, for building our democracy, for this once in a decade effort that we know is coming down the line this year. And I want to thank everybody on the committee who helped to pull this together, our League of Women Voters chapter for Kansas City, Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties. Another big action you can take is to get involved in our committee. Our committee is working on this. We want to be prepared, and we want to help issue a call to action alongside Sean, alongside all of our counties, alongside our statewide team. So get involved, and let's share the link in chat for our League of Women Voters Kansas City chapter. Whether you're tuning in here on Zoom or you're tuning in on Facebook, we want to make sure that you have an opportunity. Get involved, come join us. We have great conversations. Mary Lindsay, our chair, is doing a fantastic job. I want to thank our committee chair, Mary Lindsay. I want to thank our committee members, Marianne Weinkoop, Rita Golden, Rachel Thompson, Brenda Richardson, Karen Woods, Christine Garvey, Cindy Schmidt, Mary Kingsley, Charmin Lang, Stacy Webb, and I'm also a member, Rachel Patusik. And we want to thank Sean Nicholson again for being here. So that's a wrap for our time tonight. Thank you so much. We are committed to do this work alongside you. Let's keep building this effort and thinking creatively about how we can do it. So to close out tonight, we're going to bring back Shanna Jones for another round of her redistricting song. Feel free to sing along, and thank you so much, and have a great night. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Oh, they drew the district boundaries in a manner so obscene. People gather signatures to make Missouri clean. We cast 1 million votes with fair elections as our dream. People power makes us strong. people power pulls together to create a better world forever. Gerrymandered boundaries will sever. People power makes us strong. Jeff City politicians said, oh no, this shall not be. They created a chicanery they call Amendment 3 to negate election ballots of a strong majority. People power makes us strong. People power pulls together to create a better world forever. Gerrymandered boundaries will sever. People power makes us strong. With power, we are fighting to protect democracy from redistricting shenanigans, unfair skullduggery. Fair and free elections will depend on you and me. People power makes us strong. When people power pulls together to create a better world forever, gerrymandered boundaries will sever. People power makes us strong. Oh, when people power pulls together to create a better world forever, gerrymandered boundaries will sever. People power makes us strong.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you all.